Hey everybody, welcome back to the OPD podcast. We're on episode number 22. Your host, as always, Jeffery, and co-host or other host, however you'd say it, Austin Stout from the USA. We did plan to have a coach on today talking some female specific stuff, but unfortunately technical difficulties, she was not able to make it. So we're going to go ahead and freestyle this one with a subject that has been cropping up a lot in the OPD group recently, and that is fat/fluid gains on a gaining phase. We can talk a little bit about how much is acceptable, should you limit your fat and fluid gains during a gaining phase, and to what degree. To what degree could this affect your accrual of muscle mass, and how could this negatively or positively affect your health? So we could dig into things like serum estrogen levels and whether that's beneficial for hypertrophy, and whether extracellular fluid is beneficial for strength and therefore carry over to hypertrophy, and then also how they both may have some negatives as well. So Austin, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm all good. I didn't expect you to say that with your new low calories.
Well, I try not to be a pussy, or complain or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
So we'll see. I'll let you know. We'll see how training feels. That's always kind of the determinant, because I can kind of drift through the day, but when training starts to suck, that's not as fun.
I heard Dr. Scott recently say that he never found training too much of a difficulty when dieting. It was the hunger outside of training, because he was so used to training hard. Do you not feel like that?
No, because I feel like I adapt to the hunger. I do get hungry. But there's so many things. There's so many things that you can do to blunt hunger, as far as just drinking fluids or diet sodas or stimulants. There's just so many things I can do to take care of the hunger side of things. I frankly just feeling like utter shit, and when the weight. And it's not so much like right now, the training feels okay. I'm losing some reps and stuff on the sets, but I can still handle more or less the same amount of weight within 15 to 20%. But it's when the weight starts feeling really heavy, like you unrack it and your whole body feels like it's just going to crumble. Mm-hmm. That's what gets me. It's like unrack a squat and you feel like your bones are just going to break.
Yeah. Oh man. And you just don't want to be there.
No, I don't. I'm not going to lie. People can say whatever they want. They can, try to motivate themselves or whatever. But I feel like for some people, there's just no way around it. You don't want to train. It sucks.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me personally, but if you feel bad enough, it's a matter of doing the things that are hard and that you don't necessarily want to do to get to the end result that you do want.
Yeah, I think there definitely comes a point with everybody where they're so systemically and physiologically depleted and psychologically that I don't think anybody, no matter how much you love training, in that state that you truly do want to go in and kill it and catch new PRs without, maybe unless you take a double serving of some Stimumax or something.
You get. I'm gonna hold my tongue on the training thing, because right now it's going pretty good, all things considered. So I'm not gonna try not to jinx myself, but if I can keep it relatively decent up to the 2-week mark. When I hit two weeks or so out, I really don't give a fuck if my weight's drop in the gym, because at that point, don't get injured, Yeah,
you're not losing any muscle there anyway,
No, not at all.
Just keeping it moving, partition some nutrients, and then get out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's get into the topic a little bit. So I guess if we're going to start right from the beginning, we should probably put in the caveat of whether we're talking a gaining phase as like after a show, or after a mini cut, or after just a normal fat loss phase, or after a maintenance phase. They're going to be like very different conditions of how far this is going to be applicable. And at the very opposite ends of the spectrum, for example, right after a show, accruing a great deal of body fat and fluid is both easy and extremely dangerous if you push calories too high. Whereas at the other end of the scale, if you're coming out of a maintenance phase and you've maybe just started a new growth hormone and insulin stack, or you've pushed the calories a bit harder, or you've let your serum estrogen come up a bit, and you may gain a bit of fat or fluid, they're completely different examples. So we'll likely have to apply quite a bit of context as we go. So if we cover the most extreme example now of the post-show period, and gaining fluid or body fat after the show, I think it's worth saying that it is very important that you get yourself out of that calorie deficit as fast as possible post-show. I prefer to actually push calories a little bit harder out of the show to put a bit of body fat on the client initially, personally, because they will feel better, they'll perform better, and they'll be physiologically in a better state to reinstate health markers and everything. So if you're truly contest shredded, you know, you're not trying to stay there. So inevitably some fluid and some fat's going to go on. But saying that, it's on a sliding scale. There comes a point where if you're pushing body fat to such a point and fluid to the point that you've got peripheral edema and your blood pressure's flying up, then that's no good either. So you do definitely have to find that middle ground. I just wanted to throw this in here because it's not necessarily within the context of what we're going to be talking about, which is just generalized off-season gaining phase, you know?
Right. Yeah, and it's the scale. I mean, you can't really put a number on it either. It's going to really, person's body size would probably be the biggest determinant, you know, or how depleted they were to begin with. I mean, you're going to have, I'm going to be okay with somebody that's, you know, has 200 pounds, 220 pounds of lean body mass, gaining 15 to 20 pounds relatively quickly in most situations, if it's just filling them out in fluid. Now, if that happens to 120-pound female, we have a problem. You know, it's two entirely different body mass. There's a lot more intracellular space in the bigger person, obviously. So that's kind of something worth mentioning. There's the body, the size of the body, the amount of muscle tissue, the amount of just space within the body that water could potentially store is going to be a big factor.
Yeah, for sure. So should we take this podcast over just to the context of off-season gaining phases, just assuming that this isn't part of any rebound or anything like that? This is just maybe how hard somebody would want to push their fat and fluid throughout what you might call a massing phase over, let's say, a 8 to 16 week period. If you want to go that way, Austin.
Yeah. I mean, I can jump in if you want. I think you mentioned a couple good factors in there. As far as supplementation is going to play a big role in this. I mean, that's going to be, and just I'm not even going to say supplementation. I'm just going to say hormone environment in general, because really supplementation is just creating a different hormone environment. If you're coming out of, we'll say, you know, you're using an off-season situation. Let's say you're doing a cutting phase or a leaning phase, and you're just using a TRT dose, you know, normal physiological range of testosterone. You don't have anything else in play, and even if you did have something else in play, like a DHT, you know, base drug or something, amount of water is going to be pretty minimal at that point, if any. Plus, you know, fat cells hold water. You don't have as many, you know, if your fat cells are shrunk down, then, you know, obviously you're not going to hold much fluid. Biggest your biggest swings are absolutely going to be adding in anabolics and growth hormone and insulin. I would probably say in terms of speed of gaining fluid and just sheer weight is going to be adding in growth hormone and insulin can throw things up really fast. And it gets, you need to know what to expect and not to freak out, when you see the scale shoot up. And it gets tricky. It takes a trained eye because too, you're also trying to increase calories. And a lot of people are going to increase calories based on weight, body weight, what the scale is showing you, when at that point it's really not, it's really not a good determinant. You're going to have to go by, and even I could even say hungers might not be a very good determinant either. So it's really going to take a trained eye, listening to all the points of feedback, and being okay with, you have to kind of trust it. You have to know that, okay, I'm not going to get fat if I'm coming out of this and just adding modest amounts of calories. My metabolism's going to upregulate. All these things are going to upregulate. So I'm going to be okay. You have to kind of trust. That's kind of where we're at right now, with you coming out of your cuz. We just have to know that in the background, okay, I'm not putting on substantial amounts of body fat because it's just not possible right now.
That's a great point to mention, because in a lot of individuals, especially if they hold a lot of fluid, maybe in their lower body or their lower abdomen, it looks just like fat. It will look, to the untrained eye, to somebody that hasn't been coaching a long time or hasn't got much experience, it will look like body fat. Just like if a pre-contest client is really flat, they often look fat because that pop and that dryness goes because there's that subcutaneous wrap over your muscle belly. So yeah, as you say, Austin, trust in it. Absolutely. If you are implementing a hormone stack, especially growth hormone and insulin anchored, I'd say from anecdote, growth hormone is the biggest culprit in terms of fluid retention, especially if you've got a fairly narrow growth hormone to insulin ratio. Then absolutely. And if you're running growth hormone at, like, for most individuals above 8 units, the water retention becomes pretty severe. There are ways to modulate this that we're going to get into in a bit, because there's also ways to modulate water retention from other means as well. So maybe we could put that in at the end, namely through electrolyte control, monitoring of your health markers, and narrowing that androgen to estrogen ratio in the off season. And we can tell you some ways to do that. So yeah, on the hormone environment point, we've said growth hormone and insulin, especially long acting insulins in my experience, or if you're microdosing growth hormone, which I would advise over bolus dosing, you will see a greater fluid retention just from the higher growth hormone serum level, and the greater increases in IGF-1. If you're using a long-acting insulin analog like Lantus or Levemir or something like that, again, anecdotally speaking, high amount of fluid retention. Another thing that could be mediated by the growth hormone insulin fluid retention is a blood pressure increase, so definitely keep a watch on that. And that's again another reason why you guys should always aim to have your own individual electrolyte balance nailed down, because that will have a great effect on reducing blood pressure, as well as being proactive on reducing blood pressure through other means, like various supplementation, things like beetroot extract, or just eat beetroots. And we could go on forever about that. Possibly the use of an ACE inhibitor or ARB, the new generation ARBs, like Telmarstan. Is that how you say it? They're pretty good, and they're also good for inhibiting the activation of the RAAS enzyme, which is activated by anabolics like nandrolone and responsible for left ventricular wall hypertrophy as well, so they can work well. But yeah, back to my original point, electrolytes, specifically your sodium to potassium ratio, and experimenting with the two. And don't be afraid to push your potassium higher over time and allow yourself to adapt to that. So I generally, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I would generally start clients at like a 1-to-1 ratio of sodium to potassium, maybe around 5 grams of each, and then scale the potassium up from there until I can note their biofeedback and their look improving, their performance in the gym improving, greater vascularity and a lesser extracellular fluid retention. So many of my clients on higher growth hormone insulin stacks end up somewhere around 10 grams of potassium and 6 to 8 grams of sodium, which is a fairly aggressive electrolyte stack, but it's not something to worry about if you're controlling for it and working up to that amount over time. So don't just jump there straight away. We'll come on to the androgen-estrogen ratio stuff when we talk about anabolics, but I think that's growth hormone and insulin fairly well covered. So back to the original point, that's a reason why. Sorry,
I was going to say, did you mention with the you may have mentioned it, I might have missed it, with the electrolytes and growth hormone, that growth hormone does in fact change. It does cause sodium retention because it does have some additional aldosterone activity that you wouldn't otherwise have without it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and generally that would make people want to pull back on sodium. I wouldn't advise that. I've seen that advised. I would say growth hormone as a whole would increase your electrolyte needs, specifically within the balance that we've spoken about. But yeah, just take note that if that happens, expect it, be psychologically ready for it, and know that it is for a hypertrophy return. And again, you're going to have to put up with it, which I guess is if you want maximum hypertrophy over an off season, you're going to have to accept, and you want to use growth hormone and or insulin together, there's going to be a trade-off there with holding some fluid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't really have much to add other than that bit on the sodium retention. So yeah, I would, and I'm normally in a similar boat than you. I would rather just balance it out with some additional potassium supplementation versus pulling back on sodium. And and that's really the same for most people that are advised, even, people that just have general hypertension, and their doctors or whoever advises them to pull back sodium. Typically my first inclination is to actually just increase, potassium and water intake, and that typically takes care of it. So
yeah, insulin itself activates some sodium and potassium, the ATPase pump within the muscle cell itself, within the skeletal muscle cells. So that could probably mean increased sodium and potassium would be beneficial to those people that are using insulin in super physiological dosages, which will allow amino acids to be further driven into the muscle cells with that greater sodium and potassium amount in the blood, which is really why we're using insulin and growth hormone to increase whole body protein synthesis rates with insulin and decrease rate of amino acid oxidation, i.e. breakdown, specifically leucine, with growth hormone. So again, a benefit that may have a trade-off in terms of fluid retention.
Yeah. And I think we should mention too, before we get into what's happening in the background, is why would we want some fluid retention? I mean, we haven't really mentioned that. Why would we want some fat? Well, you mentioned fat accrual. I think that's, most people know you do need a certain amount of body fat just to maintain homeostasis and to just function normally and feel good. But fluid fluid also does have some benefit to an extent, to maximize hypertrophy. I'm not going to say you need to hold fluid, because there's people that just naturally don't hold fluid that grow just fine. But there is some benefit to having extra fluid. I mean, I would say, especially with gym performance and just overall nutrient retention in the muscles, I don't even know a good word for it, when you're, ultra hydrated or have that extra fluid retention, it tends to help with muscle pumps. It tends to help with performance. I noticed that I'm definitely stronger in those instances too. So for me, it mainly translates over into increased training performance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
no, I completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. And you're going to weigh a little bit more. So, you know, your moment arm on every, your sort of loading of every compound movement's going to be a little bit more beneficial. Just general cushioning, anti-injury rating, and yeah, you're going to be stronger, because it's the same thing as like glycogen super compensation or greater blood volume and things like that. If there's just more in there, and yeah, there's more in there to do more work with.
Let's see.
So we did growth hormone and insulin. Should we stay on the same kind of thing? Go to anabolics?
Yeah, absolutely. We can. It's relatively similar. It's just that some of it will depend on. I would say the speed in which it causes any kind of retention is slower, and in general, I don't think anabolics cause as much water retention. I mean, the main thing is going to be aromatization. That's going to kind of determine how much water how much water you're going to hold from anabolics. Obviously, if it's a long ester or something and it takes time for your serum levels to go up, it's going to take a little bit of time to really notice that retention. But with that said, I do feel that a lot of people make a big mistake in trying to minimize that, their estrogen. And that's really what I'm assuming that's what you wanted to cover too, because I mean, that's normally where I see the issue. And as I still battle people about this quite often, the idea of keeping estrogen so low, whether it's and that goes for fat loss too. We won't cover that today, but I mean, estrogen in general is anabolic. It does have huge benefits to hypertrophy and fat loss. Suppressing it is not going to be beneficial. And there's a point, there's obviously a point where you don't want to cause side effects. You don't have to walk around with a ridiculous serum estrogen level. But at the same time, I would venture to say that the typical range that most people are aiming to keep their estrogen in, I hear people say, well, I want to keep it from, 20 to 30 or 20 to 35 or something like that. And I don't necessarily think that that's necessary. If that's where you naturally sit, okay. But if you're using copious amounts of aromatase inhibitors to attain that physiological range, then I don't really think that that's necessary. I would have zero problems with somebody walking around with a serum estrogen level of 100 or so. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. And it's probably going to be beneficial. I mean, the obvious thing would be potentially irritating just breast glands. If you're somebody that has pre-existing gyno, there are other ways to combat that too. But, and I, like I've said, I've told you, I've had this discussion with my doctor too. He's big on letting the serum estrogen levels flow up higher outside of normal outside of what your range is typically going to be when you go get your lab work done, I should say.
Yeah. Honestly, these days I don't really look at estrogen on male clients' blood works, because I've just found it to be a complete non-issue needed for any blood level. I mean, like you said, if you're running a TRT dose, yeah, maybe it's a good idea to have a check to see if your estrogen is around the physiological range. But even then, if it is above the range and you're not suffering symptoms, then what's the issue? Of all the papers that I've ever read on serum estrogen in males, I've never been able to see anything that points towards the fact that high estrogen to any amount has deleterious health effects in and of itself. The only things I have been able to find is the ratio of that estrogen to your total androgen count. So, in other words, if a bodybuilder's running 100 times a higher testosterone level than the normal physiological range, then why would you expect your estrogen to not be 100 times the normal physiological range too? So there's not really any drawbacks health-wise of high estrogen within itself if you are not symptomatic of any estrogenic symptoms like gynecomastia or acne or high blood pressure as a side effect of the fluid retention that high estrogen presents. Now, most people would suggest that you use an AI or something like this, an aromatase inhibitor, to lower your serum estrogen. But what I would recommend if you are asymptomatic of an estrogenic symptom is either use a different hormonal stack, like using lower aromatizing, I shouldn't say aromatizing because nandrolone doesn't actually aromatize, it converts via a different enzyme, but a lower estrogenic stack or a higher androgenic stack. I'd lean towards going lower estrogenic. So if you're running 1 gram of testosterone and you have gyno, you could drop that to 500 milligrams of testosterone and add in 500 milligrams of nandrolone, for example, because now we have reduced the estrogenic content of the stack, but it is equally, if not just very slightly more on paper, anabolic. But you still have sufficient estrogen in there for physiological function and anabolism. And yeah, like you said, estrogen in and of itself is incredibly anabolic. If you look at the old cattle studies on trenbolone, and then they add estrogen to the trenbolone program, the cattle that had the higher serum estrogen versus no estrogen with the same trenbolone had huge differences in hypertrophy potential and fat loss potential. Like you said, estrogen in and of itself is very lipolytic. So yeah, I generally go on basing your estrogen on your own biofeedback. If you can run testosterone higher and not have symptoms, great, because you have sufficient androgens and sufficient estrogens. If you can't, maybe use an anchor for your stack like a nandrolone, which would help keep that fluid retention down, which is what we're talking about, which in turn will keep your blood pressure down, or implement a non-aromatizing androgen like Masteron or Winstrol or Trenbolone in some cases. All of these can be used just to increase the androgen total of your stack without pushing any more estrogen. But I don't like to proactively limit estrogen because of how anabolic it is, and especially not putting it down with any AIs, because they have a whole host of nasty health effects, from bone demineralization to trashing your lipids, etc. So I stay away from that at all costs and modulate the stack over that. But to get back to the original point, no, in a growth phase I would not proactively limit estrogen unless you're getting bad estrogenic side effects. And back to the fluid retention thing, unless it's really causing your blood pressure to go up or giving you nasty peripheral edema and you're not symptomatic of other estrogenic side effects, then I would not touch the stack.
Yeah, and I typically do the same thing too. I would rather just change the ratio of the compounds. I mean, that's normally a pretty relatively easy fix. You can pretty much fix side effects at that point if there are any. And I think too that a lot of people don't really have side effects. They just are stuck on this idea of, hey, I need to have my estrogen down, when really if I can have them sit back and detach that train of thought, like they really don't have as many side effects as they think that they have.
Yeah.
So, and you made a good point about really looking at estrogen as a ratio. Mm-hmm. Look at your serum testosterone levels and realize that you are going to aromatize at a relatively similar rate, regardless of dose. So yeah, I mean, you can't expect a serum estrogen level of 30 if your serum testosterone is 5,000. It's not, that's not how our bodies naturally aromatize. With that said, I mean, that's not to say, because I know that we talk about this in the group and stuff a lot, and that's not to say that no one is going to not have side effects from estrogen. So I think that that would be a silly comment. I do think that there are people that it may just make them generally feel like emotional or moody, or, if it gets high enough. So, I mean, if you are someone that experiences that, it's definitely worth just checking on your labs. And again, easy fix for most people is just changing the ratio of the compounds. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I really can't think of an instance where I would have any clients running a gram of testosterone anymore. Just not anymore these days, because I just don't I've just found that people just generally feel a lot better when they run other primary anabolics and keep the testosterone low. So I can't.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't. I've got one client that strangely enough does get estrogenic symptoms from nandrolone and gets anxiety from boldenone. So we do run higher testosterone, as they just don't like individually biologically get any side effects from it, but I balance it out with testosterone. So for example, the current stack for him off the top of my head is 750 milligrams of testosterone with 400 milligrams of masteron per week.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I've also seen the flip side of it, where there's people that run a gram, maybe even more, with no AI and no estrogenic side effects whatsoever.
Yeah, I've seen it.
I mean, it happens. I think there's people like that too, because I don't even know when aromatase inhibitors really came around in the bodybuilding scene, but if I had to venture to say,
80s,
when people, yeah, but I would assume that when people started running testosterone as a primary, because, most people say, well, most of the people started with oral anabolics like E-ball or something like that. Whereas when testosterone really came on big on the scene, I would venture to say that most of the people didn't know what an AI was.
No, I think most people took tamoxifen at that point and let their serum estrogen sit higher, which I think is one of the reasons why we saw those sort of puffier looking off-season physiques back in the 70s, early 80s, but they made such... I think we can learn something from that era of them letting their serum estrogen run higher and not caring so much about looking good 365 days a year, and understanding the process that came from those golden era guys that had proper off seasons, and they made real strides every year because they didn't mind getting a little bit fluffy and a bit watery.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to add to the estrogen side of things. I'd have to find it, but if anyone's interested, I do have a study. I think I have it saved on here, talking about the benefits. It's actually talking about the benefits of estrogen for, I think it might be for fat loss and not hypertrophy, but still, it still goes along with the idea of not crushing serum estrogen. It was one that my doctor had sent me, so I'd have to find it if anyone's interested.
I think I know what you're talking about, the lipolytic. I think you posted it on Facebook at some point.
Yeah, I posted it a few times, and it always ruffles some feathers too, because you have the AI crowd.
Yeah, so. Especially with a contest prep. I always find that weird. It's like when someone starts contest prep, it's like, right, so I'm bringing in the Arimidex now, and you think, why? 16 weeks out as well. Like, the only time, to be honest, that I've used an AI in a client, in a few clients over the last year or so, has been peak week, when they haven't been absolutely true condition and I really want to pull down their serum estrogen. And even then, I only do that in maybe, the smallest 2 to 5% of clients that I prep, because it's not necessary if you really get in true condition, because if you don't have any body fat, you don't have any fat cells to hold any fluid anyway. But yeah, I have used an AI, but that's it. Never off season and never in the prep itself. There's no need. In fact, it's going to be a drawback, like you say.
Yeah, and at that point, you're not really going to lose any more fat, so the benefit, the fat loss benefit's not really there. It's not really as big of a deal, but yeah, I see some ridiculous AI protocols for contest prep, and I just cringe. I'm thinking, why are you? What's even funnier is they get deeper in prep. Let's say they're 6 weeks out or whatever, and they start bringing in the DHT drugs and they lower their testosterone, and then their AI goes up. I'm like, why in the fuck are you taking more something that's going to lower estrogen more when you're taking compounds that raise it less or none?
Yeah. Yeah, and further closing that gap, the androgen estrogen gap, and then boom. Yeah, and good luck filling out with crushed estrogen as well.
Yeah, but okay, so let's see.
So I've done growth hormone, insulin. I think the main takeaway of all of that, in summary, in terms of drug use and fluid retention, is accept it to the point that it may cause deleterious health issues. So regularly monitor your blood pressure and don't allow any sort of peripheral edema to the point that it makes you feel awful and you can't even get up or walk anywhere. Stay mega hydrated as well, but don't overhydrate. So yeah, if your blood pressure is getting into dangerous levels or you've got some nasty peripheral edema, address it. Otherwise, accept it and deal with it, because the hypertrophy benefits in your growth phase are worth it if you are really going for maximum muscle accrual, which I imagine most people listening to this are. On the flip side, you can choose to grow slower and a bit drier if you want, and you want to stay dry. Then use less growth hormone, less insulin, less estrogenic drugs, or more androgenic drugs, so keeping that androgen to estrogen ratio more on the androgen dominant end, and that works fine. And the same thing in a prep. For example, a client of mine, 16 weeks out right now, running 150 milligrams of testosterone, 700 milligrams of nandrolone, but from that he's very sensitive, was holding quite a bit of fluid that he didn't like, which was causing a bit of a blood pressure spike. So I implemented 400 milligrams of Masteron just kind of as an ancillary to that, and it disappeared and he feels great. So that's just an example of that, because we didn't talk about it in a lower testosterone environment, because I would not want to have pulled his serum estrogen down from there, because it's, 150 testosterone plus 700 nandrolone. That's not going to be a huge amount of total serum estrogen. So I would sooner implement some Masteron, or in some cases Winstrol in that case, because he's not using Trenbolone. So yeah, guys, I think that's it. Accept it to the point that it's not causing you any health issues.
Yep. And it's the same with, it's really on the same token, the fat, just as far as accrual of body fat too. Even somebody that's not using drugs, there's still going to be the body, the body fat thing, I would say it's a lot more person dependent, just because, as we know, everyone's set point's going to be quite a bit different. But the body fat thing, I feel, is a lot easier to figure out, simply because if you have a controlled caloric environment when you're reverse dieting, or whatever term you want to use, most people tend to settle. Most people's bodies will tend to tell you when they're at that body fat set point, and they'll settle there. Now, if you're binging after a cutting phase or after a show, then yeah, you're going to overblow that set point fast. You're going to blow past it, and you're going to end up with too much body fat. But in a controlled environment with slower increases, or just, managing the caloric intake, your body will pretty much tell you. It'll pretty much get to a point where it settles down. Calorie increases will be a lot less frequent at that point. You'll get to the point where you have to be a little bit more careful with insulin sensitivity and with just the general ratio of fat to muscle gain,
Yeah, exactly. And on top of what you said there, when you have stabilized as well, don't end up just spinning your wheels and gaining weight super slowly, whether you're natural or enhanced. I still think it's a worthwhile investment to, as long as your insulin sensitivity is on point, if you're monitoring your blood glucose and it isn't flying up. Now, just as a caveat, I'm not saying keep throwing food in and just end your gaining phase before it's even started and just be insulin resistant and have to cut again. But at the same time, don't spin your wheels and sitting around because you're so scared not to gain fat. I mean, I'd like to ultimately see people gaining around 0.5% to 1%, or maybe around a pound a week on like an aggressive growth phase at least, and then you can sort out the fat that you've gained at the other end. But utilize your time wisely. Otherwise, especially if you're an advanced trainer, you will end up just spinning your wheels trying to gain a pound a month. It's untrackable, and it's a waste of time, in my opinion, for most people that are really trying to progress. So, yeah, it's a fine balance, but don't spin your wheels at the same time. Don't just throw everything in and ruin the face before it's started.
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to fall. They fall on one extreme or the other.
Yeah.
You know, they fall in the have to stay super lean to grow, or you don't. You know, when people say you don't have to be fat to grow, those are typically the people that are not maximizing hypertrophy. They're really limiting themselves because they're staying too lean. And then there's the other camp that just says fuck it and just eats and whatever, and you know, inevitably they end up just being too fat. So ultimately, I think it's almost like what we talked about with starting contest prep. You need to find an ideal ratio of just generally gaining weight, training performance, still maintaining enough insulin sensitivity that you're going to partition nutrients effectively. So you need to have all of those, a balance of all of those things, the best that you possibly can. And that's a reason that you should be monitoring all those things too. It's not just looking at the scale and saying, yeah, I gained 2 pounds in the last 3 weeks, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot more to it. You do need to maintain, you do need to monitor all those factors and make sure that they are all in line, because you will inevitably cut yourself short if not.
Yeah, and it's a good case to work with somebody with an experienced eye as well, because there will be weeks where your weight might jump, but your appetite may be well up and visually you look just as lean. It might just be a bit more glycogen or blood volume or a bit of fluid or something, and you could afford to push a little bit more, or it could be the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. So you need to work with somebody that understands how to read like multiple pieces of biofeedback and biomarkers and know your physique and how it looks, because it's really easy to mindfuck yourself. And also that you should trust the person that you're working with and just do what they say, in a sense, you know, because you can really mindfuck yourself about, oh my God, I'm getting fat. I've gained 12 pounds in 2 weeks. But, you know, if you were absolutely shredded and dry and flat before, 12 pounds isn't a lot of weight. You know, you might just be topping off by that point if you're like a 200-pound male. So, yeah, trust it and accept it to a point. Yeah, I mean, I think that's covered it pretty well. You got any other thoughts on off-season fluid and fat?
Not really. You know, everything else is just individuality at that point. So, you know, you can't, it's hard to really expand on anything. And that's always our disclaimer with anything like this when it comes to something related to biofeedback, is it's always individual. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we covered that well. So I think the basic kind of summarizing takeaway, sort of too long don't read of this whole podcast, is you should accept some extracellular fluid gain, and you should accept some fat gain if you want to really maximize your hypertrophy or growth phases, whatever you want to call them, within the realms of maintaining a good health panel in terms of like blood pressure, any peripheral edema, things like that, and within the realms of keeping your nutrient partitioning high and your insulin sensitivity good, knowing when to pull back and reset your blood glucose when it starts to dip down. And just grinning and bearing it. If maximal muscle accrual is your goal, if it's not and you want to stay drier and look a bit leaner, that's fine, but just accept that your return on investment is going to be lower and it's going to take longer to reach your end goal, wherever that may be. I understand for some people maybe they're already at their end goal or they're very close to it, so they want to take it slower. Most people, that's not the case. Most people are trying to maximize their off seasons and they're trying to maximize their contest prep phases. So yeah, psychologically relax, don't stress yourself over it, and just know that it's a means to an end to grow optimally. I mean, I often use myself as an example of this
where I'm somebody that holds like a shitload of water. I'm like a water buffalo. When I start dieting, I lose 20 pounds in the first week from minor adjustments. And then when I put a little bit more calories in or some growth hormone and insulin, again, I gain 20 pounds in like a week. And it's just always like that. But the last gaining phase I did, I gained 45 pounds in total, dieted back down and was about 14 pounds heavier than I was previously at the same conditions. So I put up with that fluid, and I put up with the fact that I looked pretty fat for like 12 weeks. But at the other end, it was worth it for that accrual of muscle tissue. And I'm sure, Austin, you see it the same in clients all the time. And the clients that can switch off to it and just relax and accept it's part of the process, they always have the greatest return on their investment at the other end. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you took someone like yourself, if we were to really hyper focus on water retention, I mean, you wouldn't gain shit. You wouldn't gain any muscle.
Yeah.
You know, you would diet back down, and you would be a half a pound heavier when we're done, which is just, I mean, and to me, I don't understand that when people, they put in all that off-season work just as far as, being consistent, repetition and training to diet back down and have little to no new muscle tissue. So it has to be frustrating.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely agreed, man. Nice one. This has been a really cool episode, actually. I'm glad we got this done. And yeah, we'll close it off there, guys. So, Austin, what are you up to now for the rest of the day? It's quite early where you are, isn't it?
Yep, 10:06 in the morning. Yep. So just, emails and training and all that stuff. Cardio, lots of that.
Cool. Yeah, the usual. I'm on a rest day today myself, so I'm not training. And actually, to be honest, today I woke up and I thought, thank God I'm not training today. The last few days of training, I'm battered.
That new training block, man.
Man, it's hard. I read it when you sent it over, and I thought, yeah, this looks really cool, man. And like the time that I'm spending in the gym is a lot less than I was, because I just think the total sort of volume on paper in terms of time per bout is less, but the work density is so high. Like a lot of cluster sets, a lot of failure points, generally high intensity, a lot more focus on like progressive overload compound stuff. So yeah, I did back yesterday, some rack pulls, some heavy rack pulls, that 8 sets of 2. I got 235 kilogram, which isn't heavy at all, but yeah, my erectors and my traps today are just trashed. But it feels good, man.
Yeah, I would say it's a shorter amount of time, but you actually have more total work sets in there than what you had.
Yeah, and I'm hitting stuff like every day, like chest I'm hitting like every day, hamstrings I'm hitting like every day, and it's like some like back I'm hitting like 3 days in a row, like pretty hard as well. So it's like it's just on that rotation, it's just killing me. But I got push tomorrow, the first push session I'm looking forward to. I'm gonna band up the incline Smith and get that going. I bought some new daisy chains, yeah, to use for some old Joe Bennett style incline presses, and just want to get really strong. Couldn't do floor presses in the gym, so what I did was set up the Smith machine so that it was racked as if I was pressing from the floor.
Yeah, just a dead stop.
Yeah, and just, oh my God, pecs were smoked. I mean, I'm really like, and I've been working with this with clients as well recently for hypertrophy blocks, like really focusing on that end range for the pecs, or any press they do aside from a dumbbell press, doing a reverse band so that the top range is always got a greater load on it, because if not, you're always kind of generally undertraining that range with any movement, because the bottom part of the range is like so much stronger. And yeah, the difference is huge for me. So yeah, I love that movement. My chest was smoked after that. So yeah, I'm gonna take my dad to the gym now. Actually, it's his first gym session since he smashed his back up, and I'm gonna see what he can do, getting some personal training. And I haven't done any personal training for years, so I'm just gonna see what he's capable of. You still there?
Yeah, sorry, my speaker kicked off. I said, yeah, good luck with that and enjoy. Hopefully he gets back on his feet pretty quick.
Yeah, so I just want to do a little shout out to our sponsors before we close this off. So firstly, long-term sponsor from our friend Sam Roth over at Mediphorm. Mediphorm is a hyaluronic acid-based site enhancement product. In my opinion, by far the best site enhancement product on the bodybuilding market today. Sam has also just released a rapid loading version of Mediphorm, so for you guys that are just getting started on Mediphorm and want to load the hyaluronic acid faster, then you can get on the rapid loading. I believe that might have already sold out, to be honest, but Sam will have some more. We're pretty much sold out here in the UK too, but again, we're going to have some more in soon, so head over to mediphorm.com to get some of that. He's always got some good deals going on over there. Use it in your lagging muscle groups. You don't have to worry about blurring or any lumps or clumps or anything like that, because it's all self-dispersing. Also, our sponsor KOMPAK, which is KOMPAK.store. KOMPAK is a one-stop shop for everything that you need for your show day. So everything from rice cakes to bikinis, absolutely anything you can imagine. You select exactly what you want in an individualized box and it gets sent to you, all with your name printed on it and everything, all personalized and done lovely. So you don't have to stress out your autonomic nervous system and get those cortisol releases before your show. Shopping around, it's all there for you. Also, we have a brand new sponsor to announce today. So maybe, Austin, you want to tell the guys about our brand new sponsor?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to bring on Metal Clothing Co. It's a US-based company, so there will be distribution, though. I do believe they ship everywhere from what he's told us. So they'll be shipping internationally. There's a brand new site going up, which we'll link you guys up to the Instagram. He gave us some Instagram links. There's a brand new site going up because they had just revamped a lot of the clothing line. So we'll get that linked up. And maybe we can just link that up next week's episode, because hopefully he has it up by then. But they have an assortment of different clothing, anything, t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, shorts, leggings, all really high quality stuff. It's nice. I mean, we're excited. I think this is a sponsor that I really wanted to have. Never really found a company that I liked enough to do it, and I think that this is going to be a hit. So
yeah, for sure. I think it really suits the ethos and the feel of this podcast, and for our listeners, it's definitely a clothing company that people would want to be involved with. So yeah, definitely. I'm really happy that we got the guys from Metal on here, for sure.
Absolutely.
Nice one. Okay, well, thanks for listening, guys. Please keep sending over your questions or whatever you got over to us over on the OPD page, or get me and Austin on email or Instagram or whatever, and we'll keep doing podcasts for you guys. Please leave a review below if you're on iTunes or podcasts. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and we'll do our best to keep the podcast relevant for you guys. So thank you so much for listening, guys, and I will see you next week.